further ado, let me get started. So, formally, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining EliteCISOs last session of 2022. I think in past 1 year, I was kind of calculating. So we had done more than 150 events in past 1 year. And this includes online webinar, virtual roundtables, physical roundtables, fitness events, and larger conference, as well as we just came back from an offsite in Vietnam. So all in all 150 plus events we have done. So thanks for the support that you have shown attending webinars and physical events as per the invite. So let's focus on the today's today's webinar that we have with Sophos. And to present this webinar, we have Anthony Murray joining us from Australia. And Anthony will talk about the global SOC, the functioning of global SOC, what goes behind running a global SOC, what kind of manpower, what kind of skills, challenges what kind of challenges are there in managing such a global SOC. So Anthony works as Senior Director of Product Marketing at Sophos, and this session is purposely kept short instead of entire 50-55 minutes. The slide or the presentation is going to be for about 30-35 minutes so that we save about 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. So we have seen in past there are a lot of questions in this session and we do not get enough time. So this session is kept small, 30-35 minutes, and then we will open the Q&A. At the end, we will also share the certificate that you can put on LinkedIn that you've attended this session. We will do Wheel of Fortune, and the giveaway for Wheel of Fortune is a nice jacket. I'm sure in the North India, there are winters there, but for South and Mumbai region, West region, for Delhi, I believe a full sleeve jacket will go, and for Mumbai and Chennai, a half sleeve jacket will go. I'm sure people travel, so they may use this. Last but not the least, the stand and attend challenge that we give in every single webinar that we do. What is stand and attend? It is simple challenge that we give that for next 1 hour, instead of just sitting and watching the webinar, you are supposed to stand and attend this webinar. Why stand and attend? If you look at the left hand picture, it shows if you're going to sit for a prolonged period of time, we are all IT professionals and all, and the job requires us to sit. So if you sit, you might get all these problems like foggy brain, heart disease and all. So how do we avoid that? Instead of sitting the entire day, maybe you should take out some time and stand while you're working. So at least for this 1 hour, if you're going to stand, the right hand side picture shows that you will get all these benefits: weight loss, pain reduction, posture improvement and all. So that's the challenge. I do not shy away from giving in every single webinar. So please go ahead, accept this challenge. And if you accept, go to the chat and say, yes, you are accepting the challenge. Let me see how many people are accepting this challenge. Bombard the chat with your yes. Awesome. I like that. Great, great. It is good. I mean, not in this webinar, but apart from the webinar in the office also, we should practice standing more. With this 11:04 perfect timing, let me transfer it over to Anthony for this session. I'm here, just not visible on camera because I'm little under weather today, so don't want to look too shabby on the camera. The recording is also on. So with this, Anthony, over to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you very much, and welcome back. And everyone, thank you for having me as a speaker once again at EliteCISO. I'm very glad to be back, and let's get into this topic. This is a very meaty topic, and 35 minutes. It's a very quick introduction of how a global SOC works behind the scenes. I like giving this presentation for two reasons. There are some customers who want to go and do threat detection and response and incident response themselves. And to them, I say, congratulations to you, sir. Best of luck. It's a wonderful feeling when you stop an attacker coming in, but I like to educate people so that they walk into their situation with their eyes wide open. What do they have to start doing if they want to take on that challenge themselves? And then, of course, there are all the other customers who just look at an MDR provider and think it's a black box. What do you actually do? Do you just sit there, collect my money, and occasionally look at a log? That is not the case. There's actually a lot of work that goes into a global SOC, and that's what I'm going to start explaining to you today. Now, as I mentioned, I just touched the surface of this, and we'll have lots of questions afterwards, I'm sure. So let's start with a very simple definition, and I always like starting with definitions. So what is a security operations center? Well, it's a combination of skilled people, processes, and technologies, if we look at it from the highest level. So it will provide services to customers, whether that happens to be just your own business or whether you're providing that service to someone else, one or more customers. And then what you are offering is your ability to detect threats, analyze a lot of information, respond to those threats, and then of course you need to be able to report on them. If you're providing the service to someone, you need to be able to tell them what you've done. And then you also need to be able to prevent cyber attacks. Now, I don't mean ransomware when I talk about this. I mean the adversarial humans, hands on keyboard attackers that are coming to you. And then of course, depending on what you're offering, your SOC team will range from generally, I'd say a minimum of 5 people if you want to do it in-house yourself. But if I look at I know I'm going to use the Sophos MDR and global SOC team as an example a lot throughout this presentation. We have several hundred people working at our SOC spread throughout the world. And I'll give you some of those stats as we walk through just to give you an idea of scale and what it takes. Now, a SOC actually achieves its objective through visibility. And I'll say that word several times throughout this presentation, the visibility into assets across every part of an organization. The more a SOC team can see, the quicker they will pick up a threat. They will pick up the fact that an attacker is inside the organization, and then they can start remediating it and limit the time that they spend inside your organization, something that they refer to as dwell time. Now, this is, again, it's a generic diagram of what a SOC could look like and some of the roles inside a SOC. Now, if you speak to different organizations, they are going to tick some of these boxes, all of these boxes. And in fact, it will vary from organization to organizations which of these boxes they will actually tick. But some of the important ones are threat intelligence. You need to keep on top of what is the latest threat, what's going on, is there a latest vulnerability that's trending worldwide? It's things like that. And associated with that, you've got threat hunting. If you see that there's a threat, you go look for it in your customers' environments. There's a bit of threat research and malware analysis that can come with that. In fact, we do those at Sophos as a split between our managed detection and response team and our Sophos Labs team that also helps back up our products. And then there's a lot of other things in there. And this is the parts that people don't necessarily think about. There is a whole subject matter expertise on detection engineering. And what does that mean? It's working out what signals are you interested in. You're not interested in somebody successfully logging in, or you might be. It depends. That's the whole purpose of detection engineering, how to raise up the important threats and the important detections up to a security analyst so that they can look at it. Automation is a big part of a SOC, because if you cannot automate, you cannot scale. And scaling is a very, very necessary thing, and you'll see that as I speak throughout this presentation. Now, I could go through all of these, but there's a lot of things that a SOC can do. So this is just a very high level and a generic introduction to what is a security operations center, just so I can level set everyone for this presentation. So let's take a look at an example. Let's look at today's environment. So today's security environments, they're complex, they're dispersed. So organizations have users who might be anywhere. In fact, that is the case for Sophos. Our policy is remote first, so our employees are spread throughout the world. You've got physical access that could be, and physical assets, that's endpoints, servers, wireless access points, switches, you name it, anything that's physical. And that can be inside an office, it could be remote with an employee. Just like if a user is anywhere, some of your physical assets will be anywhere as well. A lot of organizations also have resources in the public cloud, whether that's AWS, Azure, GCP, doesn't really matter. They have data in their chosen cloud provider or providers, depending on the organization. And then you've got SaaS business applications. Most people will put up their hand if I ask, are they using Microsoft or Office 365? Salesforce is another example, but there are plenty and plenty of others. So this is roughly how an organization might look in today's environment. But what does that actually mean for a SOC? Well, organizations have already invested in multiple security tools to defend their environment. So you see there's endpoint or workload protection for their devices and cloud-based workloads. They may have firewalls in various places. They very likely have an email security solution. They're also very likely to have one form or another of an identity solution. Now, this could be something like Duo or Okta. And then cloud security, well, that also includes the built-in tools and alerting the public cloud providers provide. Like, for example, in AWS, there's guard duty. And then there's network detection and response, which is another category in and of itself. So as well as blocking known threats, what do all these other solutions actually have in common? Well, they actually provide valuable signals to defenders. And in this case, they're the SOC analysts. It helps them detect, investigate, and respond to advanced human-led attacks that deliberately leverage tools, tactics, and procedures designed to bypass security controls. If I'm an attacker attacking your organization, my goal is to remain invisible as long as possible, to scout out your networks, find as many of your assets and your important assets as I can, and then I work out, plan my attack, and execute it. That's a high level of what I'm trying to do. And the longer dwell time that I have, so the longer I stay in your environment, the more I can discover, the more I become a bigger threat. And this is why dwell time and detecting a threat early is very important. So each of these tools actually plays an important role in identifying threats. And for example, an analyst could use endpoint telemetry to detect suspicious activity and malware. This is the one most people will understand because they'll have either seen it or they've read about it before. Now, in my presentations, people hear me talk about endpoint protection and the importance of starting with protection. Please do not underestimate that. And why do I say that? Well, it's primarily because it can be one of the first attacker infiltration points. And endpoints also contain a tremendous amount of evidence. And that's evidence of TTPs from anything from initial access all the way through to the impact. And by the impact, I mean the ransomware that's being run. Firewall data can be used to detect intrusion attempts and beaconing. Network telemetry can identify rogue assets, unprotected devices, or any type of novel attack. Email alerts, well, phishing, everybody understands. You identify potential initial entry points into the network. Phishing also is another way of stealing access to credentials. Identity data. I'm a firm believer in identity as the new perimeter. Identity data can also help detect unauthorized network entry and attempts to escalate privileges. I like using the impossible travel alert. If somebody sent me a phishing email and I've fallen victim to it and I've provided the attacker with my credentials, I'm physically located in Brisbane, Australia. If I suddenly see somebody logs in Hong Kong, that's generally an indication that something's not right and there's something wrong with this particular identity. That's why, I'm a firm believer that identity is actually something that's very important. And then cloud alerts, we'll finish off with that. They're used to indicate unauthorized network access and potentially efforts to steal data. So there's a lot of information that can be found there. But more importantly, I mentioned at the beginning, the more visibility that a SOC team has into an organization, the more they can see. Now, let me give you some examples of that. And I'll start with 3 simple examples. And then we'll get more complicated and I'll show you why the life in a SOC is more difficult than most people would realize. So let's start with combining endpoint and firewall data. So if we see an event of an unknown process execution on, it doesn't matter the IP address, but in this case 10.0.0.33, And then we also see alerts come in from the firewall that there's a DLP prevention on the same IP address. And then there's also some non-standard port usage. Well, what can an MDR analyst gather from that? Well, one potential implication is that there's data exfiltration attempts occurring on that particular device. That's one of the things that could signal. The next one is the network or the NDR device, network detection and response, for those who don't know the term, and the endpoint product. Well, if the NDR device sees communication on an internal network and the endpoint does not recognize that that's a device under protection, well, it's a very good indication that that's an unmanaged device communicating on the network. Why is that a problem? Attackers love an unprotected device. It gives them a way to get in, establish a foothold in the environment and not be detected. And then a slightly more complicated one is email, endpoint, and identity. So in email, you'll see a suspected phishing email arriving in a user's inbox. On the endpoint, you'll see an alert for a suspicious file being downloaded. What does that mean? I, as the user, have opened the email, clicked on the link, and it has downloaded the payload. And then we also see another alert for an unexpected access to the executable. And then the identity shows an abnormal location login to Office 365 because the attacker has acquired my credentials. And then there's a forwarding rule to an external account created. So what that tells the SOC analyst is that a successful phishing email has resulted in unauthorized access and potentially a business email compromise. So what do you take away from this particular slide? Well, each signal source, so each particular category of product there is useful individually. No debate about that. However, the more signals that a SOC team can bring together from across the environment, the faster they can react. And combining signals from different sources enables the SOC team to secure an environment more quickly. Now let me tell you about taking signals, because how do you get those signals? Sometimes, and I'll use the Sophos product as an example, we can get signals from our own products and we'll understand those very well because we know what an alert from or a detection from the endpoint or the firewall means when a Sophos product issues it. But we also support third-party integrations of firewalls, endpoints, etc. Now let me show you why joining up telemetry is hard. Now this screen is definitely built to cure insomnia. What you see in front of you is 3 different alerts from 3 different firewall vendors. Now joining up telemetry is great, and there's a big but in this. The reason that most people don't take telemetry at scale is because it's actually very, very hard. You know, it's great in theory to take lots of third-party data, ingest it, mix it with your own data, and then draw a conclusion from it. At a very high level, it's easy to understand, but the actual practice of it is very, very hard. And it's this lack of complete standardization across the security industry. And anybody who's been a SIEM engineer, an analyst, and a SOC analyst especially, you'll all know that this is actually a very big challenge. So what are these that you see in front of you? You don't actually need to understand them. They're essentially raw IPS alerts from 3 different firewall vendors. But it's an example of the challenges that a SOC analyst will face when they're trying to interpret these signals. Now, each one of these actually indicates a severity, but I've actually gone and highlighted where in the message you determine the severity. Now, for those of you who are eagle-eyed, you'll actually be able to spot the locations in the 3 different messages. They're highlighted with a blue background, in case you're wondering. So the first one, the threat level, is counted at a severity 4. Firewall vendor C, it's a category 9. And then we get to firewall vendor B, who happily tells us that it has a score of 7, a severity of high, and then another score of 50 and defined as a critical level. So how do you as a SOC analyst actually take this data and then start to interpret it? And this in lies a part of the problem that SOCs, and especially global SOCs, need to deal with, is taking a lot of data from various sources and turning it into a standard schema that they can then use to start performing their detections, their investigations, and then eventually their response. And this is the part, this is just the start of it. This is just ingesting the data so that you can start this process. This is where we're starting at the very beginning. And as the title of the slide says, this is not easy, it's incredibly hard. So the previous slide, we looked at 3 different firewall vendors, and there's no standardization. And then you now multiply that challenge across different security tools, and then you can see the type of scales that this becomes. This challenge is immense. So it's not uncommon for an organization to have a firewall, an email provider, and an identity provider. And here you have an example of one of each. Firewall vendor A, your email telemetry, and your identity telemetry as well. So many organizations will run one of each of those, and this is what the raw data looks like. Again, there's no need to actually understand what that data is telling you. It's just to give you an example of, we're just at the beginning of ingesting the data. And in case anybody's actually interested, the first one is actually Palo Alto. The second one, email, is Mimecast, and the identity is actually from Duo. Duo has more alerts than you could possibly imagine. And like I mentioned, we're at the beginning. I've shown you some examples of some raw data, and to sum up, the challenge that defenders face is different security scoring systems across different vendors, high, medium, low, 1 to 10, sometimes 1 is the lowest, sometimes 5 is the lowest. You've got different types of information provided by each vendor. Some provide more, some provide less. And then they have very varied alert reporting formats. On top of that, they also change their formats from time to time. What happens if you get everything up and running and then tomorrow, pick any vendor, decides to change how they do their reporting and how they share data? Well, you have to go and fix it and keep moving and start again. This is actually some of the challenges that we face on a daily basis. And all of this makes it actually extremely hard, hard to correlate data effectively and accurately, because that's the whole point of this first part. We're just ingesting the data at this point so we can start the process. And then why do we do that? Well, we need to do that so we can identify issues in a timely manner. And then, just like everyone else, the teams are overwhelmed with alerts. And if they are unable to identify which ones go together or where they need to prioritize, that's a bit of a problem. So how do we solve this particular challenge here at Sophos? Well, this is what we call the security event flow. And it's a key element in the service that we provide. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, every MDR provider will do this in a slightly different way, but this is how we look at it from a high level at a Sophos point of view. So we take all that varied telemetry from your email providers, your firewalls, your endpoints, your identity providers, all those different sources of data, which are so wildly different. And then we put it into our data lake so we can work with it. And we put it through what is called a detection pipeline. Now that's the most important part here, and that's what I'm going to focus on for a little bit. Essentially, this is how we take all of the alerts and we convert them into usable, prioritized insights that enable us to secure our customers' environments. So the detection pipeline is the key, and this is what we'll look at in a bit more detail. So the first one is ingesting the data. So we'll ingest the telemetry, and then we'll filter out any unwanted noise. Now, this is important. Alerts that we're not interested in, we don't need to know about them. We're going to ignore them. And then that's where, if you remember back to an earlier slide, detection engineering comes in. It helps us determine, and that's always a tweaking process, what we're interested in and what we're not. The next one is actually, in my opinion, one of the most important steps, cleaning up. And essentially the whole purpose behind this particular box is transforming the data into a normalized schema and then mapping it to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'll come back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework in a second and why we actually do that. This, by the way, is also where we will fail things if a provider changes how they format the data, where they put it, etc. So it fails early. The next thing that we do is we enrich that data with third-party threat intelligence and any type of business context information that we have. We'll then cluster different types of alerts together based on entity. And by entity, that could be something like an IP address or a laptop or something that is recognizable as an entity. We'll also cluster it based on MITRE ATT&CK categorization and time. And you'll see why we do that in a moment. And then we'll start prioritizing. We'll score the different alerts, we'll cluster them, and then we'll rank them in order of prioritization. And then the last part is escalation. Sorry, I haven't been moving on the slide. Escalation is the logic that escalates certain clusters into cases for investigation. So they are serious enough where a human analyst needs to look at it. Now, at this point in time, all of this is automated. A human has not touched any of this. This is a completely automated process. However, humans are important in the process. We do keep an eye on this. We do look at how the ingestion's going, how the cleaning process is going, if there's any failures, etc. And it's constantly a tweaking process. It's not you set it and forget about it. It is something that the team is tweaking every day to make sure that they get the alerts they're interested in, and the ones that they're not interested in, well, they can be moved to the side for the moment. And then based on the outputs from that detection pipeline, we'll then create cases that are then actioned by the MDR experts or the SOC analysts in the team. And in fact, this pipeline is just the beginning. It gets on a bit more complicated from there, because the MDR case flow actually then goes off into another complete workflow itself that you see there on the right. And we'll dig into those in a bit more detail. So again, looking at this process in 5 steps, again, this is a high level description of it. And it's triage, analyze, respond, monitor, and resolve. So triage is another attempt at filtering out noise and focusing the time and effort on the legitimate threat cases so that our SOC analysts don't spend efforts performing full threat investigations that don't appear to be malicious. So it's all about optimizing the time. And then what are they going to do? They're going to determine if the activity needs to be investigated further, and if so, they will triage it so that it can be fully worked out. So they need to be able to answer the questions: have we seen the activity in this case before? It could be a yes, it's a known benign activity, or it's related to an ongoing incident or an investigation, or it could be a no. We need to analyze the detected activity and determine if it's malicious or not. So that's when it goes into the next step, analyze. And for the SOC, gaining and having situational awareness is paramount. And so that's collecting as much data as they can so that they can see that big picture. I know I mentioned that many times, but this is where it comes into play. So the SOC analyst is going to collect, identify, and review all the detections, all the artifacts, and all the activity associated with this particular incident. They're going to determine the scope and the impact of the incident and ascertain where in the kill chain the adversary is currently presiding. They're going to enrich any observables using intelligence, whether that's open source or proprietary intelligence, so that they have a richer context. So analyze, what are they doing? That they're building up all the information that they know. And at that point, you can move into respond. Once you've got the big picture and you know what you're doing, you can then move on to respond. So determine and perform short-term, medium-term, or even long-term operational, tactical, and strategic actions to contain and neutralize the threat and remediate its immediate impact. And then once you've done the respond, let's just say that is the removing of the malware, your job is not over. You need to still go through steps 4 and 5, which is monitor and resolve. So when you're in monitor mode, you're basically on heightened alert for this type of threat reoccurrence, or you might be awaiting a customer action or response. So basically, as an example, you may have cleaned up a Windows machine because it had ransomware running, but that might not be the only one. You might be waiting to see if more has come about Did you catch it at patient 0? Or did you catch patient 0, but it's already managed to infect patients 1, 2, 3, and 4? That's essentially what monitor is for. We may have stopped an attacker at one particular point, but that doesn't mean that they have stopped. And then eventually you get to resolve. And this is where the threat has been dealt with. There's no further actions required by the MDR team or the SOC. So this has been, a very quick introduction. By the way, this presentation is not finished, but this is just to give you a high-level overview of what a SOC does and one of the biggest challenges that they face, which is taking very different amounts of data and turning it into a format that they can then analyze, detect, investigate, and respond upon really fast. Now, to give you an example of how we do it at Sophos, especially providing 24/7 coverage, like I said, I will use Sophos as an example because it's just a way to help visualize the challenge that we have. Now, you can see we provide 24/7 coverage by having people in the managed detection and response team in various locations around the world: Australia, India, Germany, the UK and Ireland, the United States and Canada. And you will see the point on the far left that looks like it's in the middle of the ocean. No, it's not a person in a rowboat. That's actually Hawaii. There's a lot of people in the office actually volunteering, myself included, to go work in the Hawaii SOC team. I think that would actually be fun. But if you think about it, Hawaii is also in a nice geographical time zone to provide that additional coverage across the Asia Pacific region as it swaps from evening US time as it transitions into morning Australia time. There is a logical reason for that. Now, with people in all these different locations, you then enter the next problem that a SOC has to face, and that's developing shifts. And when do you roster people off? How many people do you need? How do you make sure that they have a normal life and that they don't work all day, every day, and they burn out? Because just like everyone else, if you push an employee too hard, they'll burn out, and then, well, you don't have anyone to do the work. So to give you a rough idea of how we do it, there's approximately 15 teams across the world in these various locations. And we break the day up into roughly 15 shifts. And there's a 1 hour overlap between shifts. Everyone needs a lunch break. Everyone needs some time away from the keyboard. Again, these are humans at the end of the day that are actually providing the service and doing the work. You can't treat them like robots. We limit weekend work, and our main goal is actually to maintain desirable working hours. These are very smart individuals. They're very good at threat hunting, and you have to treat them like humans. So there's other things that we do. Teams will work no more than one weekend a month, and no team can work more than 5 days in a row. And we also need to schedule days away. People take holidays. They may have personal projects. They may have some education that they need to do. And there might need to be process improvements. This is the next challenge when it comes to running a global SOC. It's how do you keep the business running while at the same time treating everybody like a human, making sure that they have a reasonable life while they actually do the miracles and the magical work that they do to protect all of our customers worldwide. And just to give you an indication of scale, here are some numbers for you. So this is the scale the Sophos Global SOC deals with on a daily basis. So we typically process over 31 billion events per day. And I will say that again, 31 billion. The result of that is over 358 million detections, which will then go through the process that I've talked about at a high level. And on the day that we pulled the data, this actually resulted in 367 cases. 47 of them were escalated, and one of them was actually an active threat that was detected and neutralized. And by active threat, we mean attacker hands-on keyboard. Now, you can see why automation plays a very big part in helping the team scale. And it's that ability to take all of that data, transform it into a common schema, run some detection logic over it. And when I say some detection logic, I'm not giving it enough credit. There is some very complex logic there to build up those detections, work out where the team needs to focus their time, what is the highest severity, and then action those. Now, I think these numbers actually make it clear that we're trying to do this without the security event flow that I talked at the beginning, the ingesting of all the data, even for a single company, would be totally overwhelming for almost all organizations. Now, let me take you through another couple of examples before I close off for today, just to give you an example of the types of things that a global SOC would deal with. Now, this one I'll start off with, and this is a real life example. There's a lot of things that you'll see redacted here. I'm not going to say the name of the customer, or you'll work out where they are relatively well. But this is an example of an email integration. So thwarting a credential theft attack. So the customer, they're in the telecommunications space, and they're quite a large customer, and they've got a mixed estate. They've got the Sophos endpoint, they use some XDR, and they have a non-Sophos email appliance. The rest of it, they actually have a lot more than that, but it's not necessary to give you the overview. So what happened? So an adversary actually spoofed a large European financial services company, and have a look at that line. Emails were sent from @xx.gouv instead of gov. A small change, but we're human, and those of you who have heard me speak before, you'll remember that I always say humans are the weakest link, myself included. We'll all have a moment of weakness where we make a mistake. That's why things like phishing attempts actually work so well. Now, several hundred malicious emails were actually sent to the customer's employees. Now, in MITRE, this was a spear phishing link attack. Now, the emails claimed recipient security was disabled and they needed to authenticate their identity. So what's the attacker doing? They're trying to get valid credentials so they can get in a lot easier. And the recipients were requested to click on a link, which took them to a malicious web page where they would enter their credentials and download a file to move on. So how did we discover this? So the customer's email security solution actually flagged the email as suspicious, and it modified the links to protect the user, so that's also good, but it delivered it 118 times. Now, out of all of that, 2 users clicked on the links in the modified mail, and the email solution from those 2 links generated 234 alerts. Think about that. 117 alerts per click. That's a lot to work through. So those 234 alerts, and this is how our team processed it, consolidated into 2 clusters. Our analysts actually investigated the malicious emails. What was the destination IP address that they were going to? They looked at some of the customer traffic to and from the malicious URL, and then they searched through all of the data that we had to see if there were any successful executions of the attack. Now, in this case, there was no malicious process had slipped through. The email provider had actually done what it was supposed to do and rewrite the URLs. So that the recommendation from the MDR team to the customer at the end of the day was to go and delete the malicious emails still sitting in the user's inbox. That's one example, and I'll give you one more before I finish off this presentation, and it's with a firewall. So this was a customer. They had a mixed estate. They had the Sophos endpoint and a non-Sophos firewall. And what the adversary did was they were conducting pings across the IP address, or pings across the estate using the IP address that you see there. And they attempted to inject commands into the public-facing applications, and the connection was not blocked by the customer's firewall. So what happened? Well, the customer's firewall created an alert for the exploit of a public-facing application, and we generated 2 alerts on an endpoint. So you've got 3 alerts. That's the only indication that you have that something is going wrong. 3 alerts. So from there, what the analyst did was that they identified that the IP address was conducting a ping on port 9034. They did some initial investigation and confirmed that the IP address was known bad. It was known to be malicious, and confirmed that no internal network processes had been observed in actually communicating with that IP address. So the advice at the end of the day to the customer was block the IP address at the network perimeter so it doesn't get in. Install the Sophos product to have some protection on the endpoints, and then update the UDP server to the latest version. So that's just two real-life examples of activities of what a SOC could do on a day-to-day basis. So just to sum up here, because I realize I'm slightly over time, running a SOC is a serious business initiative requiring a substantial investment if you actually want to do it properly. And you know, I've covered this at a very high level. We could spend a good day just delving deep into the processes that I've talked about. And keep in mind, some of them actually go into quite a lot of detail. I've just barely scratched the surface of them, especially the ingesting of data or how the MDR case workflow actually works. As I mentioned, if you're a customer who wants to do it yourself, or if you're paying for the skills of an MDR provider, and you're trying to decide which one you take, this is why, and it's an example of why I would always say go with an established provider. If you do want to do it yourself though, and you're serious about doing it, well, this is a slight introduction of some of the tasks and some of the activities that you'll need to perform when you do it. I will say, however, if you do it yourself, it's actually a rewarding process, knowing that you're protecting an organization or a customer's organization and ejecting an adversary and protecting them against cyber threats every day. Now, in lots of presentations with MDR providers, you'll hear them talk about finding the right number of skilled individuals, the cost associated with that. And I hope with the presentation today, I've started showing you that's just the beginning. It's all about the people, processes, and technology. And you'll hear Sophos say this, you'll hear others in the MDR space say it as well. People, processes, and technology, do not underestimate any of those, and they are all very important. So in this particular process, we actually focused more on the processes than the people or the technology, and I've just scratched the surface. That's what I had in the presentation today. I'm happy to take questions because I can imagine there's a lot. If there's an interest from this group to actually go in more detail into a particular section, I'm happy to do that at a later time. But at this point, I will turn it over to questions. Thank you.
Great. Sounds good, Anthony. Amazing session as always. We have enough time, like 15 minutes of Q&A. So guys, go ahead, raise your hand if you would like to ask any question. I see Dr. Rajan has already raised hand. Dr. Rajan, go ahead, ask your question now, please.
Happy morning, Anthony. And because thank you so much, Anthony. I think, first of all, thank you so much because you have taken us through the engineering behind from the perspective, from the point of signals through the case creation. Kudos to your entire team. It's not easy. I do agree with you because you emphasized thrice, do not underestimate the people, process, technology, the process through which these are all identified and the cases created. Amazing. The funnel that you've shown is fabulous. Kudos to the entire team which has been doing that. Okay, mine is not actually going to be a question because you have actually taken us through the high level overview of how the whole engineering works behind when a customer gets a ticket. It's not easy, a case or a ticket. But now there are two important components I see. One, the organizations who are not so wanting to become experts in information security must rely on services which are provided by Sophos because it's extremely complex to build such kind of expertise into an organization, into any organization for the matter. Leave it to Sophos kind of organizations who can actually start doing that, number one, because that's how I'm going to recommend my clients as well. And I'm completely against building every expertise that are required in security. Security is becoming very, very complex. The organization will have to do a very smart job by outsourcing those components that are required. Let me take an example of a hospital where I've been at the highest level. We should only start working on the core expertise of handling patients, not on the security. I think that's a very important component. But the second aspect that I want to touch upon with you is, see now the technologies like SOAR, which is have gone to a very different extent or expected to do this entire automation from the time of signal capturing until the case creation. Now, in SOR, in your expertise, do you think SOR is something which is doing this job pretty well, or it's doing only about 30% of what you have been forecasting on the capability?
Can you just repeat the last part of your question, please, sir?
The SOR is expected to do the entire process of capturing a signal until the case creation of the client. And do you agree on that, or do you see that? No, I think that only does about 30% of the job. There are more to do beyond SOAR.
It's the beginning of the job, just capturing the data, converting it or transforming it into something that is standardized, that which you can then execute logic over. Is it 30% of the job, 10% of the job? That part is debatable. It is. I wouldn't say it's 30% because it is just the beginning. There's a lot of logic in once you've got everything into a standardized format, working out what is important, what's not, where should you focus, and then, as I mentioned, that is literally the beginning, because you then have the cases and it then moves from there and humans become involved and it becomes interactive. It is a large piece of work, which is why I say don't underestimate it. And if you're looking at setting it up yourself, it's a tremendous amount of work. But if you look at the entire process from beginning to end, it's the first 5 to 10%.
Oh, that's a great thing, which means the organization should not become too complacent because I got an SOAR. There's so much to be done. So it perhaps justifies my own decision of leaving the entire thing with or so was kind of MDR response is done by them because you're an expert. No, let's do our job. Let's focus only on our core business, and this is something which has got to be done only by the MDR team of Sophos. I think thank you so much.
You're most welcome, and thank you for the compliment. I will pass it on to the team as well. They work very hard, and that's also a message I like to tell customers as well. Let us look after your cybersecurity, or it can be Sophos, it can be anyone in the MDR space, so you can focus on your business. Of course, obviously, Sophos would always like your business, but if a customer is engaging an MDR provider and they're improving their security posture, that is perfect. No one in the industry will object to it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Great. Sounds good. Any other question, guys? Please raise your hand. I don't see any other question or anybody else raising the hand. That means, Anthony, your session was super amazing. Everything is clear to folks. So one more question from Ravindran sir. Ravindran sir, go ahead, ask your question now. Ravindran sir, you can unmute yourself now. Okay, I can see. Yeah, it got unmuted.
Yeah, unmuted actually. Thanks, Vikas. Thanks, Anthony. It was a very enlightening session on MDR. See, I represent a small NBFC, and of course we use Sophos for our SD-WAN and see, I want to start a small SOC setup. Honestly, we don't have a CISO at all. See, as a CEO, I handle everything, all in all.
Okay.
But, to start simple, a SOC setup, how I can do it actually? Can you advise?
Well, I'll make the assumption you can find the people to help you out. The number that I always recommend is 5. Why do I recommend 5? It's simply because you can rotate them and you can give people some time off, and it helps give you a shift of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. An easy place to start is some type of, especially if you want to do it yourself, is an XDR provider, an XDR product, because that's going to give you a way of collecting all of the data into one place, and then it gives you the ability to query it. It will help you look for detections. And then once you've got those detections, that's when the human expertise starts coming in to say, okay, if the XDR product is saying this is where I should focus my time, I'll go look at that. The other thing I would say is when you're hiring people, make sure they are good at not only understanding the technical aspects of it. Finding a detection is one thing. They need to be able to respond to it. Once you've identified what a particular issue is, you need to be able to correct it. especially if there's an attacker in the environment. Hunting that down, that's a specialized skill, but it's not impossible to find. As a simple place to start with an XDR product, because that will give you a way to collate everything together. And then after that, it's a bit of the skill of the team as to how they handle it.
Great,
Okay,
sounds good.
Thank you.
And Ravindran sir, the easy approach could be just hire a CISO for yourself and he will take care of it for you.
Got it. Yeah.
Great. Let's go to the next question. Pramesh, you are on. Pramesh, go ahead, ask your question, please. Let's go to Parminder sir. Parminder sir, you are up. Yeah, Pramosh, I can see getting unmuted. Yeah, go ahead, Pramosh.
Right. So good morning, Anthony, first of all, and nice session.
Thank you.
Just wanted to understand, since you suggested in the previous question, you pointed about XDR.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the discussion or the presentation that we had, it's mostly, the SOC, it caters to your EDR or MDR section of the solution itself, right? So if I talk about XDR, what would be, what are the products like apart from Sophos? There is Sentinel-1. So in these products, what can be my comparative or competitive analysis? Like, if I have to choose a product, what should be? I know you are from Sophos, but I just need an unbiased view. If you were to be a decision maker, what are the aspects that you would keep in your evaluation criteria?
Okay, so there are many companies that offer or that provide XDR products in the market.
That's what the question is.
Yep. So that's you don't have a limited choice. Well, it is limited to a certain extent, but it's not as if you have one or two. The other things I would look at, how can they ingest third-party data? In the presentation, I talked about why it's important. Do they have integrations with the products that you have? So obviously you've already got an investment in, and I will just make an assumption for the moment, and right or wrong, it doesn't matter, but you probably have an endpoint product, a firewall, email, and identity. Most companies will have roughly those four. Some will have more, some will have less. Can they integrate with that technology that you already have in place? Because it's going to be important to pull the telemetry and to pull the detection information from those products. If you can save ripping and replacing that technology, that's important. Then obviously there's the financial aspect of it as well. The other part I would look at is how well it helps you find those detections. So when it has a detection that comes in from, regardless of where, endpoint, firewall, etc., does it help you by indicating what's the severity of that particular endpoint? Does it help your team in that process, or do they have to work it out themselves and determine it themselves? But most importantly for me is the ability to respond. What response capabilities does it provide? And does it provide all the capabilities you think you'll need? I guarantee at one point all products won't, but go for the one that gives you the most flexibility and capabilities of what you believe you'll need in your environment. Those are all high-level recommendations before we get to things like pricing and things like that. But that's what I would look at.
Great. And what about the integration with third-party information agencies like CV, Directory, NIST? These are some of the unbiased third-party organizations who deal with a lot of vulnerability information, malware information.
Yes, there's a lot of open source threat intelligence, and there's also threat intelligence feeds that you can pay for. Most of them will integrate with it, but if not, check it out as well. It's preferable if they can integrate with it, because then it just speeds up the task of a threat analyst, because it might just be one click to get the information from, say, VirusTotal. versus going to VirusTotal, putting in the hash, and then getting the information back. It just saves them time. And at the end of the day, anything to save time is important.
Is there any out-of-the-box default integrations with Sophos or any other, XDR product that is already there?
Well, Sophos offers a lot of integrations. Essentially, the same integrations that are available for our managed detection and response service is available for our XDR product as well. And why is that? It's actually because our MDR team uses our XDR product. That's why all that functionality is there. But I mean, the standard things, like I said, you should look for are whatever products you have. Microsoft, I'm going to assume you have a form of Microsoft license, whether that's Office 365 or Exchange or something like that. Microsoft provides the Graph API where you can actually extract a lot of that threat intelligence and detections from Azure or from the Microsoft products. Check whether that integration is actually available in the XDR product that you're going to use. But that goes back to my first point of what products do you use and can they integrate with it? The Graph API from Microsoft is probably a good one to look for because it gives you access to the detections from so many different Microsoft products. If you use a cloud provider, look for integration with, and I'll pick on AWS for a second, because that's a very good example, guard duty. AWS actually puts a lot of the detections from the various parts of their environment into guard duty. Now, again, you still have to take all those detections and make sense of them, but at least it's all in one place. So it's an easy place to grab from.
Great, sounds good. Now let's take the last question of the year. Parminder sir, over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. This session was very helpful, and thanks, Vikas, for organizing a great knowledge session, knowledge sharing session as always. Now, my question, Anthony, is not so much on the product or capability, but on another aspect, which is very equally important. I run a large global SOC here in India for a large insurance company, and we keep having this trained resource challenge. I mean, the people challenge. Needless to say, we are a Sophos customer and a happy one at that, just to kind of add. My question, Anthony, is more towards, are you guys considering investing in your customers' technical teams by way of certifications and trainings to create and improve that whole ecosystem?
It is something that we're looking at. It's not fully baked as an idea yet, is probably the best way to put it. But it is something that the team is considering, because there's various things that can help with, especially once we get into different regions with different language requirements, etc., where that could be very useful. Do we have an offering like that today or solid plans? No, is the basic answer, but the team is thinking about it.
Okay, that could be another revenue creator for you guys.
Potentially, yes. As always, with everything that we do at Sophos, our first concern is making sure that we protect our customers. That's a large part of what the MDR service provides, and it's what our products do as well. First and foremost, our goal is to protect customers. And as somebody who works in the security industry, and I've worked in the security industry for a long time, I'll leave it at that, across many different security providers and security companies, the goal of all of them is exactly the same. Protect the customers as best you can, because the bad guys are out there. They are always inventive, they're always creative, and they are always changing what they do. The best foot forward that we can provide for our customers and the more we can protect them, the better.
Yep, thank you.
Great, sounds good. And bang, 12 o'clock. So great session, Anthony. Let me just rush the closing.